set up this foundation so that I could pursue causes that I could still have an impact on as a private citizen. So I picked the things that I cared about, and I could do things that were quite important that governments normally don't do. And take any nation, you will find that intelligence and ability, aspiration are all evenly distributed across the society, but organization, investment, and opportunity are not. When you get into this business, you have to recognize that a certain amount of humility is
another quote from him. I told you about writing books yesterday. Here's what Mr. Clinton said about his book while he was president. He said, "Many presidential memoirs are dull and self-serving. I want mine to be interesting and self-serving." That's good. You want a president with humor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, I apologize, but I couldn't really hear backstage. So I didn't know that I had been called up. Sit down. I want to thank Raymond and the organizers of the conference for inviting me, and I hope that I can say a few things that are relevant to your lives and concerns today. This is an important issue to me, and what happens in the UK is important to me and to the world. You know, I spend most of my time now, notwithstanding the recent election campaign in America, with my foundation. I work with all different kinds of people. Half the time in America and around the world, I don't even know what political party they belong to. We just agree that we're going to tackle an opportunity or try to seize a responsibility and solve a problem. And I say our goal is to figure out how to do whatever it is we're doing faster, cheaper, and better than it was done before. In other words, I think like most of you have to think every day. And the one thing that concerns me about the way we do our business in the world is that there's a disconnect between the way politics works in many places and the way the rest of the world works. What is working all over the world is creative networks of cooperation, because there is an infinite amount of information out there and too few people who understand how to put it together. And nobody knows everything, and a broken clock is right twice a day. All of us spend our lives between those two extremes, wishing we knew everything and hoping to God we're right more than twice a day. So what works to solve problems in the private sector, to create opportunity, to support entrepreneurs, coming up with a new idea that has merit and can generate something people want or solve a problem, and then figuring out how to do it. For most of the years I spent in politics, we largely debated two questions. What are you going to do? And how much money are you going to devote to it? There was almost no focus on the third question, which I believe is the 21st century's most important question, which is whatever you propose to do, and however much money you have or do not have, how do you propose to do it? How do you propose to turn your good intentions into a positive change? For me, that normally involves trying to change people's lives. And I'll give you just one example. We're working our way out of this global financial crisis now. And I suppose I should apologize to everyone here since it started in the United States. But it is an illustration of the degree to which we are interdependent, the degree to which our borders now look far more like nets than walls. And a lot of this interdependence is great. I mean, look around this crowd. Can you imagine this crowd appearing at an event like this 30 years ago? 30 years ago, this crowd would have been older, whiter, and more male. It's a lot more interesting for me to look at you. I mean, 30 years ago, I would have gazed out on a crowd full of people who look like me, old gray-haired white guys in suits. I will say, now that I have become one, I'm glad to look out at the crowd and see that my demographic has not been entirely eliminated. Thank you very much for allowing us to be a part of your gathering. There are a lot of great things about the modern world. 8-year-old kid can get on the internet and find out something in 30 seconds I had to go to university to learn. That's the good news. The bad news is, depending on what the site is, you have no earthly idea whether it's true or not, but you can get a lot of information. But the modern world is bedeviled by three huge interconnected challenges. First, it is entirely too unequal. There aren't enough jobs, they don't pay enough, all over the world. In the UK and the US, you have persistent pockets of people who are smart and willing to work, who can't find a way into this world that the rest of us are taking advantage of. India has the world's largest middle class and the world's largest number of really poor people. Both India and China have a hard time connecting the centers of their prosperity with the people who live in small towns and rural areas, and so do we in America. So do all places of vast geographic expanse. It's quite interesting that size used to be a high predictor of the ability to produce broad-based prosperity. Now, look around Europe, or look at Africa, look at any place. People who live in countries that are compact, where people live close together and have easy access to each other and common resources, tend to have more luck in generating economic opportunity and then making sure that the circle of opportunity encompasses pretty close to everybody. So the world is unequal in terms of economic opportunity and by extension in terms of access to education, health care, capital, and a whole array of other things. And this inequality, besides being a personal and social tragedy, is a severe constraint on a nation's growth. Every time a first-generation immigrant doesn't finish school, it hurts that person. It hurts the country where she or he lives. And we have to do something about it. We have to find a way to make our economic models more employment intensive. The second problem the world has is that it is too unstable. Instability is essential in a market economy. If you're going to reward success, there has to be the possibility of failure. And then people have to be able to pick themselves up off the ground and begin again. I lost 2 elections. A lot of my friends in business have failed and succeeded. But if there is too much instability, you might as well have a static society because people become so scared things shut down. That's what always happens after a financial crisis and has for centuries. And what we're still trying to claw our way out of. In the United States today, we have fixed yesterday's problems, which societies are very good at. We're very good at fixing yesterday's problems, not so good at predicting tomorrow's and converting them. So we have the best capitalized banks we've had in 20 years. But they're not making a lot of loans, especially to smaller enterprises who need something on the order of $200,000, $100,000 or less. We have set up these rules to try to prevent the last crisis. We don't know if they're too burdensome on the community banks that are trying to generate small business growth. We're still trying to work through all that. So that's an example of instability. The fear of cyber terrorism, the vulnerability we all have to acts of violence perpetrated for various political means, all of these things add instability to a society in ways that are destructive, not constructive. So the trick of the 21st century will be how to maintain enough instability to reward enterprise and good ideas and hard work and the ability to lead and the ability to entertain us in sport and music and all of that, but not to have so much instability that things shut down. And then we have to have these years dragging along as if we have chains on our feet, which is what is frustrating people in Europe and the US and elsewhere. If you have too much, it's a severe constraint on growth and opportunity. And finally, the world is not sustainable because of the way we produce and consume energy and other more localized resources. We just had our second major hurricane hit the northeast United States, which used to be all but unheard of. No one can say global warming caused these hurricanes, but it is clear that the oceans are warmer and that warmer ocean waters lead to more severe storms, and that they're warmer for us further north. It is clear that 90% of the ice pack on the top of Greenland, which contains 8% of the world's fresh water, suffered melt this summer, and the 100-year average is 50%. If all that water melts, it could be big trouble for you. Because if 8% of the world's fresh water falls into the North Atlantic, it could block the Gulf Stream, which is what keeps Northern Europe tolerable in the winter. And some of the world's most productive economies could revert to the temperatures of the little ice age 700 years ago with calamitous consequences for 3 or 4 months a year. That's how it could affect you. Meanwhile, the most vulnerable countries to climate change are among the poorest. And if we just listen to the insurance and reinsurance companies who have an immediate stake, we are now in the second decade in a row where payouts by insurance companies for natural disasters have tripled the previous decade. Climate change is posing the risk that people in some areas near oceans where people love to live are going to become virtually uninsurable. And we have this crazy situation in America where one of our political parties still denies the reality of climate change, but members of those parties who happen to be mayors of cities along the coastline are working with their insurers to build back, to build up, to dig deep so that they can get insurance. So they believe in what their ideology compels them to disavow. That's our problem, not yours. But it will be a problem if America doesn't do something serious. We have cut our aggregate emissions dramatically in the last 2 years, only partly because of the economic slowdown, largely because we're shutting our coal-fired electric plants and substituting natural gas, and because we're finally getting into the solar and wind business in a big way. But if you just look at the vistas of opportunities you have, and then you think about everything that could go wrong, almost everything could be clumped into one of these three categories. The world is too unequal, it is too unstable, and it is unsustainable. And so I basically try to spend my life trying to figure out how to build up the positive and reduce the negative forces of our global interdependence in a way that create more space for people to live their dreams, pursue their hopes, and be empowered to do so. I think a big part of that is trying to integrate dealing with these things into business models, and for the non-governmental organizations, the NGO movement, to try to lead coalitions of the private sector and government into being more entrepreneurial. When I was president, we got an enormous number